The sun was setting over Miami Beach, casting a golden glow on the sand as Anthony Carter strolled along the boardwalk. He had been looking forward to this vacation for months, 5 days of peace away from the chaos of his job at the FBI. Dressed in casual clothes, a simple t-shirt, shorts, and sunglasses, he looked like any other tourist. But peace wasn't in the cards for him tonight. "Hey! You," a sharp voice called out from behind. Anthony turned to see 2 white police officers approaching him. One was tall and lean with a buzz cut, his face twisted into suspicion. The other was shorter but stockier, his hand already resting on his holstered gun. "What's the problem, officers?" Anthony asked calmly, though he could already sense where this was going. "Problem is, you fit the description of someone causing trouble around here," the tall one sneered. Anthony had heard this line before. "Really? What's the description?" "Black male, late 30s, wearing a white t-shirt," the shorter cop said. Anthony smirked. "That describes half the men on this beach." The officers exchanged a glance before stepping closer. "You got ID?" Anthony slowly reached into his pocket, keeping his movements deliberate. "Sure do." But before he could pull it out, the shorter cop grabbed his wrist. "I don't trust you, boy. Hands behind your back." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Boy." He felt the rage bubbling beneath his calm exterior, but he forced it down. Instead, he asked, "Are you seriously arresting me without probable cause?" The taller cop yanked out his handcuffs. "We don't need a lecture. Turn around." Anthony took a deep breath. He knew his rights. More importantly, he knew theirs. He had spent years training agents on proper arrest procedures, and these 2 were doing everything wrong. But he let them cuff him. For now. As they marched him toward their patrol car, Anthony decided it was time for a little surprise. "You might want to check my wallet before you take me anywhere," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Shut up," the short cop snapped. "No, really," Anthony insisted. "Do it." The taller cop, annoyed, reached into Anthony's pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, and the blood drained from his face. Staring back at him was a gold badge and 3 bold letters, FBI. The short cop peeked over his shoulder, and his expression turned to panic. "Shit." Anthony turned slowly, his hands still cuffed. "Yeah. Shit." The 2 cops stammered, their arrogance replaced with fear. "I suggest you uncuff me." "Right now," Anthony said, his voice ice cold. The taller cop fumbled with the key, unlocking the cuffs with trembling fingers. Anthony rubbed his wrists, then pulled out his phone. "You 2 just made a career-ending mistake. Illegal stop, unlawful arrest, excessive force. I can list the charges if you'd like." The short cop held up his hands. "Look, man, we didn't know." Anthony cut him off. "That's the problem. You saw my skin, not the man behind it. And now, you're going to answer for it." As he dialed his supervisor, the 2 officers stood frozen, realizing their lives had just changed forever. Justice was coming. And this time, it wore the face of the man they thought they could oppress. The 2 cops stood there, pale and silent, as Anthony lifted his phone to his ear. "Yeah, this is Special Agent Carter," he said, his voice steady. "I need internal affairs at my location. Now." The short cop swallowed hard. "Hey, man, let's not blow this out of proportion." Anthony shot him a glare that could cut through steel. "Out of proportion?" He took a step closer, his presence suddenly towering over them. "You profiled me. Arrested me without cause. And if I wasn't who I am, what do you think would have happened next? The taller cop shifted uncomfortably. We just thought you were a suspect. You thought wrong. For a few agonizing moments, the only sound was the distant crash of the waves and the occasional laughter of tourists unaware of the storm brewing right here. Then, the wail of sirens. A pair of black SUVs pulled up alongside the patrol car. Doors swung open, and out stepped 3 internal affairs investigators, along with a man in a crisp suit, Assistant Director Mark Ellis, Anthony's boss. The 2 officers stiffened as Ellis walked up, his gaze like ice. "Carter, you good?" Anthony nodded. "I'm fine. But these 2? They've got some explaining to do." Ellis turned his attention to the cops. "Names." The short one stammered, "Oh, Officer Bradley." The taller one hesitated. "Sergeant Coleman." Ellis smirked. "Coleman, Bradley. I hope you enjoyed your last arrest because it might be your last one ever." One of the IA agents pulled out a tablet. "We're going to need your body cam footage." Bradley's face drained of color. Coleman shifted, glancing at his chest. His body cam's red light wasn't on. Ellis noticed. "Didn't have it recording? That's another violation." Coleman tried to recover. "It must've." "Save it," Anthony cut in. "We all know why it's off." Bradley turned to Anthony, a last-ditch plea in his eyes. "Look, man, we made a mistake. Can't we just—" "No," Anthony said sharply. "You don't get to just walk away from this. You see, I am the system you thought would protect you. But today, it's going to hold you accountable." The internal affairs team stepped forward. "Officers, turn around." For the first time, the racist cops were on the other side of the cuffs. Click. Click. The irony wasn't lost on Anthony. As the officers were led away, Ellis clapped Anthony on the back. "Hell of a vacation, huh?" Anthony sighed. "Yeah. Not exactly what I had in mind." Ellis smirked. "Drinks are on me. You deserve it." Anthony glanced at the now empty boardwalk, then at the ocean beyond. His vacation might have been ruined, but justice had been served. And that was something worth raising a glass to. The beach was quiet again, but Anthony Carter knew this was far from over. Exposing 2 dirty cops was just the beginning. He had a feeling there was more rot beneath the surface. As Ellis led him toward one of the SUVs, Anthony hesitated. "Hold up." Ellis frowned. "What?" Anthony turned, watching as the internal affairs agents loaded the 2 officers into a separate car. Coleman and Bradley sat in the back seat, their eyes downcast, their futures crumbling. But something didn't sit right. "They were too confident," Anthony muttered. Ellis raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "They did this like it was routine. Like they knew they could get away with it." He exhaled sharply. "Which means they have gotten away with it, probably dozens of times." Ellis rubbed his jaw, considering it. "You think there's a bigger problem here?" Anthony nodded. No way these 2 were acting alone. They weren't worried about consequences because they've never had any. Ellis studied him for a moment, then smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." He turned toward the IA team. "I want a full audit of every single arrest these 2 have made in the last 5 years. Complaints, lawsuits, excessive force reports, everything." One of the IA agents, a woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "Already on it." Ellis turned back to Anthony. "You're not gonna let this go, are you?" Anthony crossed his arms. Would you? Ellis chuckled. Nope. He opened the SUV door and motioned inside. Let's go dig up some skeletons. 1 week later. Anthony sat at his desk in the Miami FBI field office, staring at the case files spread out in front of him. What he and IA had uncovered was worse than he expected. Coleman and Bradley weren't just a couple of racist cops with a power complex, they were part of a whole network of corrupt officers within the department. Fake charges, planted evidence, missing body cam footage, and worse. They were running a racket, Ellis said, tossing another file onto the desk. Targeting Black and Latino tourists, mostly out-of-towners who wouldn't fight back. Falsifying reports, stealing cash and valuables, sometimes even handing people off to certain judges for quick convictions. Anthony clenched his jaw. How deep does it go? Ellis sighed. Still counting. But at least half a dozen other officers have direct ties to them. Maybe more. Anthony shook his head. And they thought they could do this forever. Ellis grinned. Not anymore. We've got an undercover agent inside their unit now. In a few weeks, we'll have enough evidence to burn this whole operation to the ground. Anthony leaned back, exhaling. His vacation had turned into something much bigger than expected. But he wouldn't have it any other way. Ellis clapped him on the shoulder. Damn good work, Carter. Anthony smirked. And here I thought I was just another guy in a white t-shirt. Ellis laughed. Come on, let's go make some arrests. As they grabbed their badges and headed out, Anthony felt something rare, a sense of justice being done before it was too late. And that was a damn good feeling. Anthony adjusted his bulletproof vest as the FBI raid team assembled outside the Miami Police Department's 12th precinct. It was 4:30 a.m., dark, quiet, the perfect time to catch corrupt cops off guard. Ellis stood beside him, gripping a tablet showing a live feed from the undercover agent's hidden camera. Inside, the precinct looked like any other, officers doing paperwork, drinking bad coffee, and trading small talk. But beneath the surface, this place was a cesspool of corruption. Everyone's in position, Ellis said, his voice low. Anthony took a deep breath. Let's bring them down. Ellis gave the signal. Boom! The front door burst open as FBI agents stormed in, weapons raised. FBI! Hands where we can see them! Chaos erupted. Officers froze mid-conversation, their faces flashing from confusion to terror as armed agents swarmed the precinct. Some instinctively reached for their guns, bad move. The FBI was faster. Within seconds, several officers were slammed against desks, handcuffed, and disarmed. Anthony walked in calmly, scanning the room. He spotted Lieutenant McKinney, the ringleader. A stocky man with graying hair and a permanent scowl, McKinney had been in charge of the precinct for 10 years, overseeing countless false arrests, shakedowns, and cover-ups. Now, his reign was over. McKinney stood frozen as an FBI agent pointed a rifle at him. What the hell is this? He barked. Anthony stepped forward, holding up a warrant. This is justice. McKinney's face turned red. You have no idea what you're doing. Oh, I think I do, Anthony said. We have phone records, financial transactions, and over 100 falsified police reports. You and your crew have been running a criminal operation under the badge for years. It's over. McKinney's jaw tightened. You really think the city's gonna back you on this? You think the chief isn't in on it? The mayor? He smirked. You're picking a fight you can't win, Agent Carter. Anthony chuckled. That's funny. You sound just like the last 2 officers I arrested. McKinney lunged, bad move. Anthony dodged easily and drove a punch into McKinney's gut, sending him crashing onto a desk. FBI agents swarmed him, pinning him down as he shouted every curse in the book. One by one, the rest of his corrupt officers were hauled out in cuffs, their careers ending in the back of unmarked FBI vehicles. Later that morning, the sun had just begun to rise when Anthony stepped outside, watching as McKinney and his men were loaded into transport vans. Ellis joined him, sipping a fresh cup of coffee. "Well," Ellis said, smirking. "That was satisfying." Anthony exhaled. "Yeah. But McKinney was right about one thing, this goes higher." Ellis nodded. "Then we go higher. We take down the chief, the politicians, whoever is protecting this garbage. You in?" Anthony cracked his knuckles. "I started this. You know I'm finishing it." Ellis grinned. "Good. Because this fight is just getting started." Anthony looked out at the city skyline, knowing that justice wasn't a destination, it was a battle. And he was damn sure ready to win it. The takedown of Lieutenant McKinney and his crew made national headlines. News stations played the footage of FBI agents raiding the 12th precinct on repeat, calling it the biggest police corruption bust in Miami's history. But Anthony Carter knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. Because less than 24 hours after the arrests, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You don't know what you've started. Walk away while you still can." Anthony smirked. "Here we go." He was sitting in a safe house with Ellis, going through files when he showed him the message. Ellis read it and let out a low whistle. "Well, that didn't take long," Ellis said, tossing his phone onto the table. Anthony leaned back in his chair. "Took longer than I expected, actually." Ellis grinned. "Think they'll make another move?" Anthony's expression darkened. "They already have." He turned his laptop around, showing Ellis a newly uncovered bank transaction, one that tied McKinney's crew to Police Chief Roger Kincaid. Ellis read it, then muttered, "Son of a bitch." Kincaid was one of the most powerful men in the city. Respected. Untouchable. Or at least, he thought he was. Anthony folded his arms. "We take him down next." Ellis hesitated. "You sure? This guy has connections. We're talking politicians, judges, maybe even feds. If we go after him, it's war." Anthony's eyes burned with determination. "Then let's go to war. The sting operation." Over the next week, Anthony and his team worked in silence. No leaks, no missteps. They combed through years of financial records, tracking dirty money back to Kincaid. They found evidence of everything: bribes, cover-ups, even ties to drug cartels. Kincaid wasn't just protecting corrupt cops. He was running Miami like his own criminal empire. But the nail in the coffin? A recorded phone call between Kincaid and an unknown politician. Kincaid's voice was crystal clear: "I don't care how many they arrested. Carter won't make it out of this alive." Anthony listened to the recording and smirked. "Sounds like an admission of guilt to me." Ellis nodded. "It's enough. Let's bring the bastard down." The arrest. They hit Kincaid's mansion at dawn. FBI agents surrounded the property, cutting off every exit. Helicopters hovered above as Anthony led the entry team through the front gates. Inside, Kincaid was sitting in his study, sipping whiskey like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw Anthony, he grinned. Well. The FBI's golden boy." He swirled his drink. "You sure you want to do this?" Anthony held up an arrest warrant. Roger Kincaid, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Kincaid chuckled. You really think you've won? Anthony stepped closer. You're finished. Kincaid's smirk didn't waver. Maybe. But you have no idea who you're dealing with. Just then, Anthony's phone buzzed again. Unknown number, you were warned. And then, boom. An explosion rocked the estate, shaking the ground. Gunfire erupted outside. Ambush. Anthony dove for cover as bullets ripped through the windows. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. Boom! The explosion shattered the front windows of Kincaid's mansion, sending glass and debris flying. The gunfire outside was relentless, automatic weapons, heavy rounds. Whoever was attacking wasn't just trying to scare them. They were trying to kill them all. Anthony hit the ground, rolling behind a marble pillar as bullets chewed through the expensive woodwork. He stole a glance toward Kincaid, who was still seated, his whiskey glass somehow untouched despite the chaos. Kincaid smirked. Told you. You don't know who you're dealing with. Anthony ignored him and clicked on his earpiece. Ellis. What the hell is going on out there? Ellis's voice came through, strained. We're pinned down. At least a dozen shooters, looks like private security. They're working for Kincaid. Anthony cursed. Of course Kincaid had a backup plan. He turned his gun on the corrupt police chief. Call them off. Kincaid chuckled, completely unfazed. I would, but, he spread his arms. They don't take orders from me anymore. You've pissed off bigger people than me, Agent Carter. Anthony didn't have time to process that because at that moment. Bang! A bullet zipped past his head, slamming into the pillar behind him. He returned fire, taking out a masked gunman who had breached the room. This was a damn assassination. Anthony lunged forward, grabbed Kincaid by the collar, and dragged him out of his chair. The older man struggled, but Anthony shoved his gun against his ribs. You're coming with me. Kincaid grinned. You sure about that? Before Anthony could react, Kincaid moved. Faster than expected. He yanked a knife from his belt and slashed, the blade cutting into Anthony's arm. Anthony gritted his teeth against the pain, twisted Kincaid's wrist, and, crack, snapped it. Kincaid screamed, the knife clattering to the floor. Guess you're not as tough as you think, Anthony muttered, shoving him forward. Outside, the gunfire slowed as FBI agents gained the upper hand. Ellis's voice crackled over the radio. We're clearing them out. Get your ass outside. Anthony hauled Kincaid toward the back exit, shoving through a burning doorway. Smoke filled the air, sirens blared in the distance. Then, a black SUV skidded to a stop outside. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in a sharp suit and dark sunglasses. He looked calm. Controlled. Powerful. Anthony recognized him instantly. Congressman Richard Alderman. One of the most influential politicians in Florida. A man rumored to have deep ties to Miami's crime networks, but until now, there had never been proof. Alderman looked directly at Anthony and smiled. Agent Carter. You're making my life very difficult. Anthony tightened his grip on his gun. Good. Alderman's smile didn't waver. You don't want to do this. Walk away now, and we forget this ever happened. Anthony scoffed. Not a chance. Alderman sighed. That's a shame. He nodded toward his driver. The SUV's back door opened. A figure stepped out. Anthony's blood ran cold. It was Ellis. His boss. His friend. Standing there. Next to Alderman. Anthony's mind raced. No. No way. Ellis met his eyes, his face unreadable. Put the gun down, Carter. Anthony clenched his jaw. You son of a bitch. Ellis exhaled. You should have walked away. The betrayal hit harder than any bullet. And Anthony realized this wasn't just about dirty cops anymore. This went all the way to the top. The night air was thick with smoke and betrayal. The gunfire had stopped. FBI agents were still rounding up the last of Kincaid's hired guns, but Anthony barely noticed any of it. His focus was locked on Ellis. His mentor. His friend. The man who had stood by his side through countless operations. Now standing next to Congressman Alderman, Miami's most powerful puppet master. And Ellis had just told him to drop his gun. Anthony's grip tightened around his Glock, his pulse hammering. Tell me this is a joke. Ellis shook his head. It's not. Kincaid, still clutching his broken wrist, laughed. Damn, Carter. That's gotta sting. Anthony ignored him. You've been playing me this whole time? Ellis's face was unreadable. Not at first. He exhaled, glancing at Alderman. But then I realized the war you're fighting? It's one you can't win. Alderman smirked, stepping forward. Anthony, I actually admire you. You've done more damage in a week than most men could in a lifetime. But here's the reality, you're a single man, and we? He gestured around them. We own this city. Anthony's finger hovered over the trigger. Ellis noticed and sighed. Don't do it. Anthony clenched his jaw. Why? Because you'll shoot me? Ellis didn't answer. Alderman shrugged. Because if you kill me, nothing changes. Hell, if you kill both of us, nothing changes. You think you exposed the system? He leaned in. You barely scratched the surface. Anthony's mind was spinning, but his instincts stayed sharp. He knew one thing, if he didn't move now, he wasn't making it out alive. So he did the only thing they didn't expect. He ran. The escape. Anthony spun on his heels and sprinted toward the burning wreckage of Kincaid's mansion. Bang! 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 Gunshots rang out behind him. He dived through a broken window, rolling across the debris-strewn floor as bullets shattered more glass. Flames licked the walls, casting shadows as he navigated through the house. He could hear Ellis shouting, "Find him!" Anthony grabbed a fire extinguisher, blasting it toward the flames, not to put them out, but to create a thick cloud of smoke. Then, he moved. Through the kitchen. Down the servants' hallway. Out the back door. A black FBI Tahoe was still parked outside. Probably left behind in the chaos. Anthony sprinted toward it. Footsteps pounded behind him. He wrenched open the door, slid inside, and a gun pressed against his temple. Going somewhere? It was Ellis. Showdown. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They were alone now. No Alderman. No backup. Just two men who had once trusted each other. Ellis kept his gun steady. This is your last chance, Carter. Anthony stared straight ahead. Why? Ellis sighed. Because I don't want to kill you. Anthony's voice was low. Then don't. Ellis hesitated. That's all Anthony needed. He moved. He grabbed Ellis's wrist, twisting it violently, forcing the gun away from his head. Ellis fired, but the shot went wild. Anthony punched him hard, sending Ellis's head smashing against the dashboard. Ellis groaned, but he wasn't down yet. He reached for his gun again. Bang! Anthony fired first. The bullet ripped through Ellis's shoulder. Ellis gasped, slumping back against the seat, clutching the wound. Blood spread across his suit. Anthony breathed heavily, staring at the man who had betrayed him. Ellis coughed. Guess you still got it. Anthony clenched his jaw. You have no idea what I still have. Ellis tried to laugh, but it came out weak. They're never going to let you walk away from this. Anthony holstered his gun. Then I won't walk. He shifted the Tahoe into drive. I'll run. The hunt begins. As Anthony sped away into the night, sirens blared behind him. He was now a fugitive. The FBI. The Miami PD, Alderman's people. They'd all be after him. But they'd made one mistake. They thought he was running to save himself. They didn't realize he was running to burn them all down. The city of Miami had turned against him. Every major law enforcement agency was hunting Anthony Carter. His face was plastered across news networks, labeled as a rogue FBI agent, a dangerous fugitive. The story had been flipped. He was no longer the man who exposed corruption. He was the criminal. That was the power of aldermen. That was the power of a system that refused to be exposed. But Anthony wasn't running to hide. He was running to win. The final move. Anthony had one shot at bringing it all down. And it started with one name. Victoria Lane. A former federal prosecutor turned whistleblower, Victoria had built cases against corrupt politicians before. But 3 years ago, she'd vanished, disbarred, discredited, and forced into hiding after she got too close to something big. Anthony now knew exactly what that was. Using old bureau contacts he still trusted, he tracked her to a small safe house in Key West. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, bruised, bloodied, exhausted, she almost shut it in his face. Not interested, she said coldly. Anthony caught the door before it closed. I have evidence. The kind that gets people killed. Victoria's eyes flickered with something, hesitation, curiosity. Maybe both. Who? Anthony exhaled. Congressman Alderman. Chief Kincaid. Half of Miami's political system. They framed me to cover their own crimes. Victoria studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. Come in. The revelation. Victoria's safe house was small, cluttered with stacks of legal documents and a laptop covered in sticky notes. Anthony handed her a USB drive. Everything is on there. Wire transfers. Bribes. A recording of Kincaid admitting to murder. Victoria plugged it in, scanning the files. As she read, her face paled. This is, she exhaled sharply. This is the biggest corruption case I've ever seen. Anthony nodded. Yeah. And I need your help to bring it to the world. Victoria hesitated. You know they'll kill us before they let this go public, right? Anthony smirked. Then let's make it impossible to stop. The leak. They spent the next 48 hours gathering everything, compiling a full exposé, linking it to every major media outlet in the country. They didn't just send it to one news agency. They sent it to hundreds. Newspapers, online journalists, independent investigators, even foreign press. When the story broke, it hit like a nuclear bomb. Massive corruption scandal rocks Miami. FBI whistleblower exposes criminal conspiracy among police and politicians. Congressman alderman implicated in organized crime cover-up. And then, the protests started. The DOJ launched an immediate investigation. The FBI's Internal Affairs Division opened new cases. The CIA even got involved, digging into possible international ties. Alderman's political allies started abandoning him. Kincaid's former associates cut deals to save themselves. And Ellis? He vanished. No press conferences. No statements. Just gone. Which meant one thing. He was coming for Anthony. The final showdown. It happened in the middle of the night. Anthony had been expecting it. The silencer barely made a sound as the bullet punched into the pillow where his head had been just seconds before. Ellis was standing in the doorway, gun in hand, expression unreadable. Figured you'd come, Anthony said, stepping from the shadows. Ellis sighed, lowering the gun. I should kill you. Anthony smirked. But you won't. Ellis studied him. Why? Anthony took a step closer. Because you're not one of them, Ellis. You're just a man who made the wrong choice. For the first time, Ellis looked uncertain. Anthony kept going. You think Alderman's gonna save you? He's done. This whole thing is falling apart. Ellis exhaled. You really think exposing them changes anything? Anthony's eyes burned with determination. Maybe not everything. But it's a start. A long silence stretched between them. Then Ellis tossed his gun onto the bed. Take your win, Carter. And just like that, he walked out. Anthony didn't stop him. Ellis would have to live with what he'd done. The aftermath. 2 months later, Congressman Alderman was arrested. Kincaid? Sentenced to life in prison. The Miami PD went through the biggest internal purge in its history. Anthony was cleared of all charges. But he wasn't interested in going back to the bureau. Too much had changed. One evening, as he packed up his belongings, Victoria called. You really leaving Miami? She asked. Anthony smirked. For now. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you ever think about what's next? Anthony grabbed his bag and stepped outside. The air was warm, the city buzzing with life. Yeah, he said. I think it's time to start hunting bigger fish. Victoria laughed. You're never gonna stop, are you? Anthony smiled. Not until the job's done. He hung up, got in his car, and drove into the night.